Champions like Bernie have been inspiring generations of people wanting change, and generations of folk songs for change, just like the one you're about to hear. Thanks for watching, enjoy the rest of the programme, and stay tuned for a great discussion with Bernie. I'm Josh Okeefe, and this is We're All the Same. Oh, I got to tie my laces, hold on. They're always coming undone. If you look at somebody's shoelaces, you can tell what their life is like. See, yours are quite together. You're a quite together person. Mine are just all over the place. We're all the same, with different names, looking for love through joy and pain, all flesh and bone, all headed home. We don't even know we're not alone. We're links in the chain. We're all the same. We're all the same. Black and we're white, wrong and we're right, strong and we're weak, proud and we're meek, lose and we win, saints and we sin, give and we take, bend and we break. We'll know someday we're all the same. We're all the same. We're all in this together, through a mother's eyes. What difference do you hear when a baby cries? We're all the same, no one to blame, all going back from where we all came. Waves on a sea, dissolving the deep, woman and man, like grains of sand, through winds of change. We're all the same. We're all the same.
Everyone, and thanks very much for being with us for what I think you're going to find a very informative evening about the issue that is on, I believe, everybody's minds. And that is at a time when we have almost 100,000 people who have died of the virus, 1.4 million people have been infected, when we have over 38 million people in the last 9 weeks who have applied for unemployment benefits, and the real number of people who have lost their jobs is certainly higher than that. The question that people are asking is, okay, Trump is talking about opening the economy, but how do we open the economy in a way that is safe? So before we get to that discussion, I did want to thank Josh Okeefe from Nashville for his music. And with us tonight, we have a very, very strong panel, people who are on the front lines of this pandemic, people who know a heck of a lot about the science of the virus and how we can best go forward in a safe way. And in a minute, we're going to be hearing from Mary Kay Henry, who's the president of the Service Employees International Union, one of the very largest unions in this country. We're going to be hearing from New York State Senator Jessica Ramos, whose district is one of the hardest hit districts in the entire country. And Jessica has been working really hard in many ways, trying to protect the people in her community. We're going to hear from Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who is a physician, epidemiologist, public health expert, and is the former head of the Detroit Health Department. And last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Rishi Desai, who is an infectious disease physician, former CDC epidemic intelligence officer, and currently a chief medical officer at osmosis.org. And we thank all of our panelists for being with us. And before I go any further, let me also urge people who'd like to get updates from what we are doing to go to berniesanders.com updates, berniesanders.com/updates. So here we are in the middle of the worst pandemic in 100 years. Some 95,000 people have already died. 1.4 million people have been infected. And those are very, very conservative numbers. And what is incredibly distressing about the entire process is that we are seeing many, many workers who go to their jobs every day in large numbers becoming infected and in too many cases dying from this virus. And let me just give you some distressing statistics. And these are conservative statistics because some of them are dated, and I think they understate the nature of the problem. We have, in terms of healthcare workers, our nurses, our doctors, over 9,000 of them have been infected, and at least 27 of them have died. In terms of transit workers, according to the Amalgamated Transit Union and the Transport Workers Union, there have been almost 150,000 of their 150, not 150,000, 150 of their members have died. In terms of meatpacking workers, we're looking at almost 5,000 who have been infected, and 20 of them have died. In terms of our jails, hundreds and hundreds of inmates have died, thousands have been infected. And in terms of prison staff, we're looking at almost 7,000 who have tested positive and 28 deaths. These are just of prison staff. In terms of postal workers, people are out there every day delivering our mail or working in post offices. 2,400 have been infected, 60 have died. Grocery store workers, people who make sure that, we get the food that we need to stay alive. More than 10,000 have been infected among United Food and Commercial Workers members alone, and 68 union members there have died. So what we are looking at is a situation, rather an amazing situation, that many of these workers are lower wage workers. They don't have a choice about whether they're going to stay home and work from home and work on their computers or not. By definition, if you drive a bus, so you work in a train, you are out there. If you are checking out people in a grocery store, you are out there every day meeting and interacting with people. You don't have a choice. So what tonight is about is to ask the questions, do people need to get sick and die in order to earn a paycheck? And what can we do to make sure that when you go to work, you are not going to get infected and you're not going to die? How can we create, and when can we create, a safe work environment? So with that, let's go right now to a short video. It'll take us about a couple of minutes, but this video will reflect the views of a number of workers who, it turns out, are putting their lives on the line every single day just going to work. All right, let's see that video if we could.
We feed you, we sacrifice our health and our safety and our family's safety in order to feed your family and keep your family safe.
I feel like essential lately just means exhausted and expendable. I don't feel essential.
How many cases we got? 10. How many cases we got? 10. How many cases we got? 10. Tell the truth. How many cases we got? 10. How many cases we got? 10. They need to tell the truth. How many cases we got? 10. That's 40 to go. Close the building. Close the building.
They're trying to make a living, and at the same time, they don't know whether there's a support system for them.
Postal Service is a joke. This thing's losing billions of dollars, it has for years, because they don't want to.
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a policeman, but I try to do my part to help the public.
Okay, let me thank those workers who participated in the video. And let's begin our discussion with Mary Kay Henry. Mary Kay is the president of SEIU, Service Employees International Union, one of the largest unions in this country, a union which has many, many workers today who are really putting their lives on the line as they go to work. Mary Kay, if I could ask you, how are your union members feeling about the situation? What are they experiencing? What do they want to see happen in order to maintain their health and their family's health and well-being?
Thank you, Senator. Our members are feeling a whole range of emotions, from grief about the death of their coworkers to fear about infection that they are going to contract because they don't have the personal protective equipment they need, to anger that's making them want to act in calling on corporations and our government to do the right thing and show up and do their job like they are every day. We have nursing home workers that are having to resort to wearing trash bags instead of gowns because they don't have the protective equipment. We have fast food cooks and cashiers that are being told to wear coffee filters for masks. And if they get infected, they're told not to tell their coworkers, and then they're transferred into another store because corporations like McDonald's are refusing to pay 2 weeks of paid sick leave for people to self-quarantine. And then we have janitors and security officers who are also getting infected because of no PPE. The stories go on, and they are the stories behind the statistics you gave us before that video. The unemployment claims processors that we represent in states all across the country are having to spend the night in the office because they can't work remotely at home because we haven't invested in state government infrastructure in the past 40 years. And so too many of these workers still, this many months into this pandemic, don't have PPE, don't have paid sick leave, don't have health care they can afford, don't have access to COVID testing if they are worried that they've contracted the virus. And I think you and I both know that there are way too many Black, brown, and immigrant workers who are getting infected and dying because they're on the front lines doing the essential jobs that we are applauding every night, but that we are not respecting and valuing and demanding that corporations give workers what they need to stay safe and healthy and not have to choose between a paycheck and their life. And that's why we launched Protect All Workers 3 months ago to demand that corporations like McDonald's set the standard, and your activists can go to protectallworkers.org to take action and join us on Walkout Wednesdays and hear directly from essential workers on the front lines, where we are doing Facebook Live sessions at 1 p.m. Wednesday. It's just incredible. And I think you know it, Senator Sanders, because you've been with these workers and understand that it's totally intolerable and completely unnecessary what people are facing on the front lines of this pandemic. And you're right to question, why in the world are we talking about reopening the economy when the current workforce isn't having their own health and safety protected?
I would imagine that many of your workers literally are scared to death about going to work tomorrow.
Absolutely.
That they probably don't have adequate information as to who in their workforce, their fellow workers may have the virus. Is that the case?
That's right. Yes.
Okay. We're going to get back to Mary Kay in a bit, but let's go to New York State Senator Jessica Ramos, who, as I mentioned earlier, represents one of the hardest hit districts in the United States. Jessica, what's going on in your district? How do your constituents feel about Donald Trump saying, hey, let's all go back to work, no problem? What would your constituents like to see happen?
Hi, Senator Sanders. Thank you so much for the question. In the zip codes that I represent, we've lost more than 1,000 New Yorkers. So many of them breadwinners, so many of them essential workers on the front lines, not only in uniform, but also as grocery store workers, as cleaners, as food delivery workers, immigrants who are coming here for a better life. And there's nothing that I fear more as a New Yorker than leaving the lives of many of my neighbors in the hands of Donald Trump. And that's why because I happen to chair the Labor Committee at this critical time, have decided to introduce legislation to address many of the concerns that not only SEIU, but many of the other labor unions in our state have. And that is to make sure that workers are able to feel protected by making sure that they don't have to return to workplaces where they don't feel safe. They shouldn't feel penalized for that. They should be able to have access to PPE if their employers aren't providing it for them, and childcare. These are things that are already given to many workers, but not all. So we're trying to expand the definition. But more than that, the scariest part is that there's unemployment insurance, and there's PUA, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. There's the CARES Act that covers many people out of work right now, but that doesn't cover everybody. It doesn't cover the undocumented immigrants who clean so many homes, who help us raise so many children, who help us take care of our elder parents, and so many other jobs. They're the backbone of our economy too. And that's why I'm proposing a worker bailout that is a small tax on the increased wealth of billionaires in New York. We have 112 billionaires in New York, more than any other place in the world. And if we can tax their increased wealth every year just a little bit, we can give excluded workers $3,300 a month that will go towards paying rent, hopefully covering food and medicine if they need. So I want to invite everybody to visit fundexcludedworkers.org. That's where we're pushing for the state legislature and our governor to do the right thing and count every single New Yorker that has been hurt by this pandemic.
Jessica, thank you very much for all that you're doing and for being with us tonight. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. is a physician, an epidemiologist, and a public health expert. Abdul, what does it mean that we have a president who is urging everybody to go back to work, let's open up the economy, and yet millions of workers out there are in danger of becoming sick or in fact dying? And tell us, to your mind, what an economy looks like that in fact safely reopens. Whoops, can't hear you. It's the mute button, I bet. Still can't hear you.
Hear me now?
Now I can hear you, all right.
All right, fantastic. First of all, thank you so much for creating the space for this important discussion. Really appreciated both President Mary Kay Henry's comments and Senator Ramos's comments as well. I want to speak to this first. Let's talk to the fact that throughout this entire crisis that we've been experiencing and living through, we've seen public health constantly attempted to be thrown in the back of the car as if it was in competition with the economy. And I just want to clarify something really important here. There is no competition between public health and the economy. At the end of the day, the economy is about people coming together to exchange things, whether it's goods or services or information. And that implies that they need to feel safe and secure in being able to do that when we are struggling through an extremely infectious, very deadly pandemic. And so if we don't do public health right, there is no economy. And I sometimes use an analogy which I find helpful, and I hope it's helpful for other folks as well, that you think about a blackout, right? When a blackout happens, the electricity stops running through your home. But that's not the worst possible outcome. The worst possible outcome is what they call a brownout. And a brownout is what happens when you have electricity running through the electrical grid. It's just not enough to create the light and run the machines that you're used to, but it's enough to destroy the inner workings of that electrical grid. And right now we are coming out of a blackout, but I fear that we may be going through a brownout, and that brownout might be even more dangerous for the economy overall. So there is no way around doing this right. What we have to do is move through it. And then the last thing I want folks to remember is that the hard part about wrapping your mind around this epidemic from a scientific perspective is that we're used to what we call linear dynamics, right? So linear dynamics just move in a straight line. There's a little bit more every day. The problem with epidemics is that they don't move linearly. They move exponentially. And the other problem with this in particular is that every piece of information we're getting has already been backdated 10 to 14 days. And if you're dealing with a disease that doubles every 2.5 to 3 days, and you're 10 days behind in your information, you're potentially 3 doubling times behind. That means that what you're really seeing, right, is actually 8-fold greater than what you think you're seeing based on the data that's already old. And so it's really hard to make decisions around this, and you've got to be super cautious. And so throwing caution to the wind and telling us that somehow there's a competition between the economy and public health, all of this it's just not based in fact. I want to give listeners a couple of ways to think about what a safe economy would look like. First and foremost, that there is not disease flowing through society at a level that can make people sick at baseline. You just need less disease. And the way you think about that is that we need consistent declines in case transmissions every day. Because what I told you earlier about the fact that you can't get really good visibility on this, on the real caseload because your data is always old, what you want to be seeing is declines every day. Because if you're getting declines every day, that you're not at a level that's really high because it's been declining. And so instead of looking at the first order, how many cases do we have? Look at the second order. Have those cases been declining every day? Then the second thing I'd say is that for it to be a safe environment, you need people to be as distanced as they possibly can be. So for folks who are privileged enough to be able to do work where you're exchanging information, even if your office opens up, stay home anyway, right? Because it's always better to reduce the probability of transmission, not just for you and your family, but for society in general. But if you're someone who has to go into work to drive a bus or to cook a meal or to take care of somebody who's sick, be as socially distance as you can. And you need to hold your employers accountable to be able to provide work that is dignified and keeps you safe and allows you to stay as socially distanced as you possibly can be at work. And then on top of that, people should have access to the basic means to protect themselves, whether that's personal protective equipment in the mold of masks and gloves if you need them, or it's just access to a place to wash your hands or hand sanitizers. Everybody should have access to that at their workplace, and that should be the responsibility of the employer. We also, as a society, need to build out robust contact tracing. That's taking us from this mass social distancing, which we're coming out of, to precision social distancing. And that comes in the form of a contact tracing infrastructure, a team of people who are employed by the state or the local health department or the federal government, who can reach out to everybody who's been infected, identify who they may have exposed, and then we need testing. Everybody should have access to testing when they need testing in every circumstance. And we know even right now, we've obviously been behind the curve, but even right now, the CDC has been counting 2 different kinds of tests as the same thing that tell us fundamentally different information. One is the antibody test that tells us if you had COVID-19, and you want that test, ideally, if you potentially had symptoms, to be positive because it means that you may have immunity. The other test is whether you have COVID-19 right now, and you don't want that test to be positive. And so counting these tests together is just a grave public health mistake.
And then we'll get into this whole testing issue in a minute, because I think there is a lot of confusion in this country, not only to what tests actually reflect, but how we can use them effectively. What's the difference if you have a test if we're not using it to create a safer society? But let me jump now to Dr. Rishi Desai, who is an infectious disease physician, former CDC epidemic intelligence officer. Dr. Desai, what's your sense of what's going on now and where do we have to go?
Well, if you take it from the perspective of an employee that's going back to work, their biggest concern obviously is not getting sick and not bringing that disease back to their family. So what they want to see is that there's good training. They want to make sure that they go in, their employers know everything that they need to know, that their fellow employees know everything they need to know. And each industry is going to be different, right? So, you know, it depends if you're in a skilled nursing facility tomorrow versus if you're on a construction site as to what sort of training you need to implement all these rules. The rules are things like hand washing, sanitizing, staying 6 feet apart, making sure that you have, good PPE. That's very different on a construction site than it is, like I said, a skilled nursing facility. So making sure you have industry-specific guidelines from the CDC and vetted by those industries, I think that's very important.
Let me
you're about to say something.
Let me jump in and ask you. I mean, one of the scandals of the moment is we do not have those national standards, and we have the rather crazy situation that every state is kind of on their own, that decisions, it seems to me, are being made politically, not scientifically. I mean, there is a science behind this whole thing, whether you're in New York City or in Montana. There is a science, is there not, about what constitutes a safe workplace?
There is. There are thousands of employees at the CDC that work really hard every day to try to figure out how to get that science into places like the work setting. And so what we need to do is get those guidelines from the CDC in partnership with organizations like where Mary Kay comes from that, think through the careful things and the answers, and the questions that people have on the front lines. Those guidelines have to exist. They have to exist federally and get actually implemented. The other half of it is, and I know you said you're going to get back to this, but is of course testing to make sure that you do it on a routine basis, not just one and done, but maybe weekly or bi-weekly to make sure people know if you're sick, you get caught quickly.
Let me mention this to you. I talked to somebody the other day who works in a child care center here in Vermont, which is going to be reopening within a couple of weeks. And I said, well, you're going to be testing the teachers there. And she said, yeah, they will. And I said, how often? They said, well, once a month. What does that mean? I mean, is that a sensible protocol? Sounds to me like it's not, but what do you think?
No, I think that's really not sensible, because what happens is that you might feel a sense of comfort for that month until the next month when you find out someone's positive, but immediately your mind should wonder, when did they go positive? How many people have they been in contact with for the last 3 weeks? That has now spread this out of control. So that's really not a sensible way of doing it. I think what we need, and it really depends on the industry again, but is in a high risk setting where you have a chance for really having a big outbreak, you should be doing this at least once a week, maybe twice a week. It again depends on the setting, but I think once a month is honestly not even, I'd rather not test, and here's why. It creates a false sense of security. Because if you test and you think you're negative a month ago, and then you go out and just do whatever, you don't wear a mask, you think, oh, I'm negative, what's the big deal? You didn't interpret the test right. Now you're actually putting people at more risk. I'd rather have a frequent testing approach where you actually can then rely on those findings.
Okay. Mary Kay, let me get back to you. Many of your workers are nervous, and they're nervous for good reasons, because they're seeing their coworkers get sick and in some cases die. How responsible have the employers for the workers you represent been in protecting the interests of your members?
Where we have collective bargaining agreements in healthcare, janitorial, security, and public services, employers have been working together with us to get PPE. And you're right, Senator, it's been a scramble. The President of the United States abdicated his responsibility for making sure that we had enough personal protective equipment for everybody in every situation. And so in the collective bargaining situations, we have had ways to problem solve and work it out. In the places in the country where we are trying to support non-union workers who are trying to join together and advocate for themselves, workers are being thrown to the wolves. I just think it's outrageous what McDonald's Corporation has done by lobbying Congress not to force them to pay paid sick leave. They refused to provide health care as a condition of employment. They reduced hours. They told people, how dare you get infected? You should have taken better care of yourself, and then not had them get any reimbursement. And so it's an outrage from our perspective, the ways in which non-union workers, lives are being sacrificed. You posed that question earlier. I think McDonald's is one corporation out of many, like Amazon, that's deciding that Black and brown workers' lives are okay to sacrifice in this pandemic. And we're a community of people that understand that's absolutely wrong. And that's why I join with Senator Ramos in saying, calling on you as a leader of this movement to help us get the next version of the HEROES Act through the Senate and to the places in the country we need it. But frankly, government can't act alone, and we have to require corporations and business to do the right thing as well by paying living wages, healthcare, helping get access to testing for all low-wage workers. And that's why it's so important, I think, to be taking action in this time. There's incredible bravery and generosity happening all across the frontline workforce in service jobs and in all kinds of healthcare jobs that I think are remarkable, given the fact that working people's lives are on the line.
You know, what I find as particularly obscene is that the people who make the decisions that workers don't need protective equipment, they don't need sick time, they're sitting home right now in lovely, in mansions. They don't go into work. They're not interacting with anybody. But as you said, what they are saying is, you want to get a paycheck, you go to work. And if you get sick, tough luck. If you die, we're sorry. But that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. And I think what this pandemic has done is kind of lifted the veil about the inequities and the vulgarities of our society today. Who the essential workers are, how expendable they are, how ugly some of these corporations are. I personally get really sick and tired of turning on the TV and seeing these companies run these ads. Thank you, heroes and heroines. But of course, we're not going to pay you any more money. And that is just, to my mind, nauseating. Jessica, you are a hard-hit community. What role can the government play in providing a sense of security and safety to the people in your district, which is a working class district, which is an immigrant district, which, as I understand it, is a black and brown district, and a district that is really hurting right now. All right, if you were sitting where I'm sitting, what would you do?
That's right, Senator. We speak more than 160 languages here. I represent LaGuardia Airport, where a lot of airport workers are also on the front lines. Even before the pandemic, they were dealing with bodily fluids and all sorts of things, cleaning those airplanes. I also represent an Amazon warehouse where we had the first person get infected and realized that Amazon failed to notify any of the other workers that this had taken place so that they could take the proper precautions to keep themselves safe.
They knew that somebody got sick.
Yes, sir.
And they
Amazon
didn't have the decency to tell people who were in contact with that worker about the fact that that person was sick.
No common courtesy, no respect, no notification that the area would be disinfected, that the proper precautions and guidelines would be followed as an employer in order to maintain a safe workplace, as it should be. Amazon failed us here in Queens in that way. And that's why I'm trying to work with my colleagues in the state legislature to remedy these issues that we've had. Every employee should be notified if one of their colleagues gets sick, in writing, in their native language. There should be no excuse for anyone to get sick on the job. And if a worker doesn't feel it's safe enough to return to their workplace, they shouldn't be penalized. They should be able to get unemployment insurance. They should be able to get any other assistance program.
All right, I want you to repeat something. We did a program on this just a few weeks ago, but I think a lot of people still don't know that. If I am an undocumented worker in your district or any place else in America, am I going to get, and I pay taxes every single week, right?
That's right.
Am I going to get any of the benefits that Congress passed? Do I get any benefits?
None.
Right,
if you are an undocumented worker, you pay taxes and you're working hard every day. And yet this, the United States government and New York State does not provide any benefits, zero benefits, no stimulus check, no unemployment, no food stamps, no nothing to these very hardworking families that are a fabric of our communities. And it's hurtful. It is insulting because we trust these workers with some of our most precious members of our family and our most precious things, and yet we're turning their backs on them. We bailed out Wall Street. They can bail us out.
You know what? It's also pretty stupid because if an undocumented worker cannot afford to go to a doctor to determine whether or not they have the coronavirus, and they're going to work and they're spreading that virus, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
That's right. We are very fearful here of a possible second wave of the virus because we're not taking these precautions. The weather is getting nicer. People want to do things outside. Between protecting workers and being active and progressive around an open streets plan, we can do this in a way that is contained, controlled, and following the guidelines from our medical community.
Okay. Abdul, let me get into, and I get to Rishi in a moment as well. Let me get into this testing business. For a start, how reliable are the tests? If I go in today and I get tested, I'm negative, I'm positive, can I be 100% sure about the accuracy of that test?
No. We know that the testing is getting better and more tests are hitting the market. But the problem with that is that the tests are of variable quality. You think about, especially these point-of-care tests where you get something feeded right back to you. 15%, so 15 out of every 100 people who take that test and do have coronavirus will return a negative test. And that's a really, really dangerous thing because you think that you don't have it, but you do. And so we allow you to be and do in society in ways that would potentially spread it. And that can be really dangerous. And so as more and more tests come out, we have to characterize more and more of them, but that's a real problem.
All right, let me stop. are we doing better in developing tests that are more accurate?
As more and more tests hit the market, we should get better testing, and the better testing will rise to the top. But it's still a matter of time. And then the other problem is that the age-old problem where we've been behind on testing, continues to hit us. We still don't have the basic reagents and the swabs at scale that we need to be able to do contact tracing testing in a level that really meets the needs of what we'll need as we open up.
As a layman, let me ask you this. Is it true to say that the tests that take a few days to get results are more accurate than the instant results tests?
So the new tests are being developed every day. So far, that is the case. That the older tests that do have to be sent into a lab are on average more accurate. But every test has its own accuracy, so that's not true across the board.
Okay, let me go to Rishi. Jump in on tests as well. Where should we, if we had a sane federal government at this point, what would we be doing to protect workers in terms of testing?
That's a big question, but let's start with just testing. I would say that the way to think about it is that it's not like one test is evolving and getting better and better and better. It's rather that we've got lots and lots of tests, and we're sort of trying our best to find the garbage ones and saying, so let's sort of weed these out and letting.
Why out of curiosity, on an issue like this, why in fact are garbage tests allowed onto the market? Because as Abdul said, it's a disaster. Somebody says, hey, you're negative. I go to work and I infect 20 people. Not a good thing. Comment?
It's a hard situation because you basically say to the industry, hey, put out a test, and a lot of manufacturers will say, sure, we've got one, we'll make it. And they internally don't really have a lot of capacity to do quality control testing. They're trying to get it out in weeks, not months and months. The FDA has a process. It's called emergency use authorization. Well, what do they do exactly? They're reviewing paperwork. They're not actually going and double checking the basic data. They're just reviewing the facts that were sent to them and saying, oh, this looks reasonable. Let's give this an EUA. And so the FDA is under a lot of pressure to get these tests through. And so what we're doing is really once they're released, at that point, now they're tested out in the community, and we can say, let's take some known positive COVIDs, some known negatives, and let's just test 12 or 15 of these tests against the same batch, and let's find the best ones. And you know who's doing that? Mostly it's academia. So academics are saying, let's do this testing and let's just do this quality control and figure out which are the good ones or the bad ones. That work takes time, and that's why we're only now in May kind of figuring this out. But the quality is a little bit all over the place. My first question to you, if you said you got a test on it, if it was positive or negative, would be which one? Tell me the exact brand. Let me go look it up and see what data that brand has, because that might be one of the good ones or one of the lousy ones. That's what's going to matter.
I mean, shouldn't the federal government have been playing a much more active role in sorting out and working with the good companies as opposed to in getting rid of the bad ones?
And the easy answer is yes. The more complicated answer is that we've really de-resourced, defunded a lot of the, not just federal government, but even state public health labs have been defunded to do a lot of this due diligence. And so it's hard to say to one of these organizations, hey, how come you're not doing your job? When they would say, well, you haven't resourced us to do this for years and years. Now you're asking me to do this job. This is what you get.
All right, let me go back to either one of you, the doctors, for a moment. If somebody comes down, is tested positive with the virus, are we confident that they have developed immunity and that they can go back to work and not be infecting other people and not getting sick themselves? Do we have any high level of confidence in that reality at this point?
I have a high level of confidence that if somebody gets COVID-19, we know they got it, they get better, they recover from it, that if they have a normal immune system, which we would presume that they have a normal immune system, you would usually know that if they didn't, then that they would have immunity and they will not get COVID-19 again. I have a high level of confidence in saying that.
And I want to be clear that that's a different thing than having an antibody test that comes back positive. And
correct, exactly.
And that's the thing. So if you've had the syndrome and you've cleared the virus, you have functioning antibodies because that's why you cleared the virus. That's how that worked, right? But we also know that there is a wide level of asymptomatic disease. And a lot of people are getting tested to see whether or not they have antibodies. What's not clear is whether or not one of those tests that comes back and says that you have antibodies implies that you then also have immunity to COVID-19 in the future.
So what you're saying is I could have had the virus, I have antibodies, but depending on a number of factors, you're not quite certain that I'm going to be immune.
Yeah, if you had COVID-19 and you had the syndrome and you got sick and then you got better, we're pretty certain that you're immune. But if you just have antibodies, or a test tells you that you have antibodies in your blood, there are a couple of reasons why that may not translate to immunity. One, the test is wrong. Two, you have antibodies, but you don't have enough that can beat it back and keep you immune. And then three, that I'm trying to think about a third scenario here. Rishi, help me.
Maybe
those are really the big two.
You might be immunodeficient or something like that. But no, I think the first one is probably the biggest one.
The reason I talk about these tests is we're not talking about something as an abstraction. We're talking about tests helping us know what kind of work environment might be safe. All right. Now, all over the country, there's now a discussion, for example, and Mary Kay, I suspect you have employees at universities and colleges around the country and in schools.
Yes, we do.
All right. So there's a lot of discussion about let's open up the schools. Kids don't get sick all that often from the virus. What's the problem? Blah, 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 blah. All right. Mary Kay, what are the fears? What are your workers worried about if we open up schools, for example?
It's the same set of fears about, are we going to have the personal protective equipment we need? Will we follow the health and safety precautions that our public health officials and that both doctors on this panel have described? Are we going to reinvent how we do the work? Because the way we did the work before COVID has to change during COVID in order to keep the infection rate down. And people remain concerned about the fundamental inequality that you spoke about earlier, Senator, which is low-wage work has never been valued. People never had paid sick as part of their benefits. They don't have access to affordable health care. They have to scrap right now to find COVID testing that they can afford or get entitled to. So people have really been thrown on their own. And when it comes to schools and universities, very similar situations where the low-wage workers, the adjunct professors don't feel protected and thought about. And they're asking the question, what are we going to do here? Are we going to make choices that continue to deepen the pain and inequality that we've experienced specifically in Black, Brown, and immigrant communities? Or are we going to use the return to work to finally address the systems and structures that never valued those lives to begin with? And that's what I think is a key question.
And let me pick up on that and ask Jessica, and then Mary Kay, you can comment as well if you want. I find it really interesting that many of my Republican colleagues are just outraged by the fact that the CARES bill provided a $600 a week extra benefit on top of unemployment. And you know why they are upset about it? They're not upset. Yeah, it's a lot of money, they're conservative, fine. But you know what else they're upset about? They're upset that workers now, let's just say you get $300-400 normal unemployment, you got $600. You know what? That would average out over a year about $50,000. You're almost in the middle class. What a terrible idea. Hey, you are making $9-10 an hour. That's the way we want it. Who the hell do you think you are? And if you're making $50,000 a year or you're receiving that, what bad ideas might you develop from that? Jessica, you know where I'm coming from on this one?
I think I do, Senator. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that compassion is a universal value, unfortunately, although that's, I think, why we're organizing here. We want people to understand that there is value in investing in other people because we have a shared public health system. We have a shared public education system. I'll tell you, as a public school mom, here in New York, we're concerned because now there seems to be a related new syndrome that is attacking our children. More than 100 kids here in New York seem to be sick because of some related disease to COVID that we don't seem to understand quite yet, much less than COVID itself. So I don't know if we'll be able to be ready for September when school's supposed to start again. But we want our children, of course, to live a full life where they're able to interact with others, with their peers, so that they know what it's like to play outside, so that they don't grow up with a certain mentality of fearing the other. That's something that I have been thinking about a lot as we change behaviors as consumers, as students, as workers. We cannot lose that human connection.
Mary Kay, I want to go back to you before we get back to the doctors. Tell us, in your judgment, and you touched on this a moment ago, kind of what lessons we might learn for society at large based on this terrible pandemic and economic meltdown. For example, what have we learned about our healthcare system?
I think we've learned that it's broken and it needs a major overhaul, and that simply fixing it around the edges isn't going to keep our country safe, and it isn't going to guarantee that every working person and member of our families and all of our communities, including the immigrant community, have to be covered in our healthcare system, or we can't stem the spread of this virus. That's one thing we've learned. We've also learned that poverty wage work is unacceptable. And I think people are shocked to learn that many essential workers in this country have no paid sick leave as a condition of employment, and their employers don't give them affordable health care, even though they're working in 80 and 100 hours a week. So as you said, it's taken the covers off a level of inequality that I now believe that most Americans find completely unacceptable, and that $15,000 a year should be the bare minimum that every worker earns in this country so they can provide for themselves and their families and not choose between risking their life and creating a future for their children. And so
that's why I'm fighting for at least a $15 an hour minimum wage. Yes. Jessica, for your district, I mean, one of the astounding things that I think we learned, we have known it, those of us having this discussion have done, a lot of Americans did not. Before the pandemic, we had a president who was going around saying, this is the greatest economy in the history of the world. Everybody is doing great. And yet it turns out that if the paycheck stops coming for 1 week or 2 weeks, people got nothing in the bank, they got no reserves, and suddenly there is no food on the table. What does it say about an economy where so many people, even if they are working, are a half an inch away from desperation?
Senator, I think it says that unfettered capitalism doesn't work. I mean, how is it that in a country and in a state where we certainly produce enough food for everyone, I have to deal with the food desert? I had to figure out by myself how I would call farms upstate that I had worked on with last year in order to pass the Farm Worker Fair Labor Practices Act. Luckily, I met them, I formed relationships, asked them for vegetables that they were going to throw away because so many restaurants are closed, the very same restaurants so many of my neighbors used to work for. That's the same food that my friends, the farmers from upstate, are bringing down here. And it's unfortunate, that we have to continuously figure out these solutions on our own because leadership fails us, because we fail to see undocumented people as the human beings that they are. There are kids' classmates, there are coworkers, they're like everybody else. And we can be doing so much better by them.
Abdul, let me ask you this. Give and Rishi, you jump in as well. Tell Mary Kay and Jessica, give them advice as to what kind of workplace you think would be safe. How do we reopen the economy so that the 2 million people in Mary Kay's union feel comfortable that when they go to work, everything being equal, nothing will be 100%, but everything being equal, they're not going to get infected, and they're not going to infect their family members when they come home. What does that kind of, and I know it'll vary industry by industry, but what are some of the protocols that you would establish?
Yeah. So in general, it ought to be a workplace that protects you from being exposed, meaning there's maximal possible social distancing, and that there are all of the means of preventing an infection, whether that is hand sanitizer or a sink to go wash your hands, or it's PPE that you need to wear. Two, it's the kind of place where if you are exposed, you will know about it, right? That they are well hooked into the contact tracing apparatus, and that everybody has testing, and that really is government's responsibility. And then three, that if you are somebody who gets sick, that you are not going to have to lose your wages over it, that you are not going to be fired because of it, that you're not going to be blamed for it, and that you're going to be able to go home and heal and protect yourself and your family by staying home. I think if we think about it that way.
There was a piece that came out, I think today, that tens of thousands of people in this country unnecessarily died because we didn't begin social distancing when we should have.
Mm-hmm.
And the virus just blew up all over the country. Tell Mary Kay, what kind of protocol would you fight for testing for people in her union? How often should people be tested?
I'll give you my thoughts, and I'd love to hear Rishi's as well. I think you should be tested anytime there's a credible exposure, no doubt, number one. Number two, I actually think that in high exposure settings, that if we were testing every 2 to 3 days, which is what appears to be the latency period here, that would be the safest possible approach. And then the last thing I'll say is that your testing should be high quality and it should be fast. And so of all of those tests that are available, we want to select first on those that are both sensitive and specific, meaning if they say that you have the test, you have it. If they say you don't have it, you don't have it. And that they're fast, that you get that information quickly, rather than having to wait multiple days.
Rishi, what's your advice to Mary Kay and her union members?
So in the interest of time, I don't want to underline or underscore everything Abdul just said, but ditto, plus I would just do a Monday, Friday, mostly because Monday is when everyone's had exposures over the weekend, so that would be very helpful. Friday splits it out.
So you would test everybody walking into the workplace on a Monday?
Monday and Friday. And I would also make sure you do blanket testing the day of anyone sort of announcing that they have COVID-19. That's something that Abdul just mentioned. I'm just saying the same thing again. I would also say that we need to make sure that we cover not just maybe the general term worker is a little vague, but employees, contractors, part-time consultants, anyone that's on site has to be part of that. And it's not just that testing has to be covered, but you have to incentivize the entire process. You have to make sure that testing is covered, the right to the ER is covered, the whole hospitalization, the recovery period is covered. Like all that has to be covered, and you have to be the one advocating for that. Because if you don't do that, then the person says, I don't want to be part of this. I can't. Maybe you cover the test. That's $100. What about the rest of that I have to pay for? So all those incentives have to be aligned really carefully.
On that one issue, it is incomprehensible to me that in the midst of the worst pandemic in 100 years, we're still worried about whether people can afford to get a test. I mean, that is like a brain dead concept. All right, but I want to go to Jessica. Mentioned you have children in the in school right now?
I do, Senator. I have a third grader.
All right, reassure her, guys. I mean, what should she ask for to make sure that her kid is safe, that she feels confident that her children are safe, and in fact, they're not going to bring back that virus into her home? And let me ask you this while we're at it, in terms of kids and the possibility of opening schools. Many, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, that many children may get the virus and not have any symptoms at all, but can spread it. Is that the case?
I'd say that's mostly true. There is now an understanding of Kawasaki disease, toxic shock syndrome, these sort of things. Right. Is the rare thing. But yeah, in general, I would say that that's an accurate assessment.
All right, so what do we do for Jessica's school to make sure that her kids are safe and that her family is safe? What's the protocol there?
I think general principles similarly to what we talked about with respect to a workplace, that you want to have as little mixing as possible. So for example, places like cafeterias should just be a no-go. Kids should eat in their rooms. You want to have as little mixing between adult staff as possible. So the staff restroom that should be closed down. And
but let me ask you this: what does it mean for the actual classroom? How kids are sitting? Can you still have the same number of children in a classroom, or you're going to have spacing and fewer kids in the class?
You know, Senator, you're always balancing the need to protect the public's health with the recognition that your resources are limited. Ideally, what you'd want to do is have as minimal possible number of students in a classroom with as little admixing between classrooms as possible. Considering the fact that our education system has been underfunded for as long as it has, we already deal with overcrowded classrooms. And so, the question here is always a toggle between the best case scenario for public health, which is minimizing any interaction and continuing to do school socially distanced, with the reality that a lot of kids miss out because our school systems are so underfunded, and the bulk of the burden of that tends to fall on the lowest income kids who may not have the ability to access school via Zoom. And so ideally, you'd want to have a large classroom with as few students in it as possible, where they could be as distanced as possible, where everybody was wearing masks, where nobody left that classroom to interact with other kids. Any outdoor play would be limited to a certain number of kids who would be asked to, again, socially distance. So things like Foursquare or the games that kids play in the recess, that would be very limited. And you would definitely want to be careful with how you enter and exit the building. So you'd want a very clear staged entry and exit process, so that as few number of kids and adults were in the hallways as possible. That's ideal, but again,
let me ask you this. A lot of debate now. Do we open the schools in the fall? Do we open colleges in the fall? What's your thought?
I think it's going to be, I think it's unlikely that a lot of schools will feel safe enough to open up colleges. I think that lower education is different because the cohorts are smaller, so the risk is therefore smaller. But you're talking about a college campus, that's a very different ball of wax. I do think that there are some concrete things we could recommend. So for example, with young kids, I have a 3-year-old, so I can relate on the first grader there, Jessica. But clipping nails, keeping windows open, washing desks multiple times a day can be part of a routine for the classroom that can occur even in a low resource setting. So those are small things that do help with the risk. And every little bit of risk you can reduce really does make a huge impact down the road. So those are little things to add to Abdul's answer. And in terms of the big question of like universities and colleges, I would say probably not, unless we really feel comfortable. And at the moment, we don't see that.
And Senator, just to add to that, a lot of this is we're going to have to really see where we are in June, July, and August, because the risk of a very serious second wave is still imminent. And, the one way I think about this is that, you think about feeding a fire with wood, and every institution says, well, look, if I just bring my little piece of wood, it's not going to build this fire back up. But if all of the institutions bring their firewood, you're now feeding a pretty big fire. And that's the danger, is that everybody's quote unquote opening up at the same time, which now increases massively the amount of interaction and increases the risk of spread.
All right, we got we have many questions are coming in from our viewing audience. And let me start off with an interesting one from a gentleman named Nick Rhoda. And Nick writes, quote, as a restaurant owner, what are some things we can do to ensure the safety of our diners once restrictions are in place for in-house dining? All right, you own a restaurant, you want to do the right thing. I want to go to the restaurant, I want to feel safe. What does a restaurant look like?
I'll throw up a couple of suggestions. One, make sure your HVAC system is working. Make sure you can turn over air multiple times if you can increase the capacity of that. That helps with, diluting out the virus. Space out diners if you can. That's an obvious one. Make sure that if you can create barriers between diners, you do that. You can do that with plants or other objects like that. there's quick kind of DIY type solutions. I'll turn it over to others that have ideas as well.
Yeah, if I can lend the lawmakers' perspective here, here in New York, we want to take advantage of the good weather, and we know that many people are still not going to listen to our protocols or guidelines. So we want to take advantage and really think through urban planning and see what streets we can close off. Superblocks in Barcelona have been very effective, even pre-pandemic, in reducing carbon emissions from cars. But now we're finding that it allows people to socially distance appropriately in the street, because ultimately streets are for people and not for cars, especially here in New York. So if we can help our restaurants put outside seating, even whether it's on sidewalks or if they're in the way in the roads themselves, then perhaps we can help our small businesses pull through this pandemic as well.
Good. And then the only thing I'd add is that we want to vastly limit the interactions between wait staff and multiple tables. And so the more you can, leverage, any sort of telecommunications to get an order in, and then, think about how food is delivered while minimizing people who move between multiple tables at the same time, that is ideal.
Okay, we got a question from Kim Bonin, who writes, this I think is probably directed to Mary Kay. What would happen if essential workers decided to stay home and risk jobs until they are heard regarding safety and living wages and affordable, accessible healthcare? Mary Kay?
Well, we had a 20-city strike at McDonald's of workers deciding to stay home and strike virtually. And the consequences when people don't have a union are they get the hours cut, they get transferred to stores, their schedules are messed with. But in spite of all of those consequences, there's incredible bravery happening. The Amazon workers in the Bronx, where the senator is, walked off the job in protest on personal protective equipment. We've seen Uber and Lyft drivers. We saw Domino pizza workers actually win PPE from Domino's because they joined together. I think there's amazing activism and courage happening because working people have had it. They want real change, and they're using this crisis to exercise their collective power. And so I think we're going to see more and more of it because, as you've said, Senator, it's totally ridiculous because we are a nation that has the resource and people know that we can do better, and that now is the time for us to organize and make sure we use each other's power to demand what every worker and every family member deserves in this pandemic.
Well, Mary Kay is being modest because the SEIU working or helping to organize the Fight for 15 movement has done an extraordinary job with incredibly brave workers in the fast food industry who stood up and fought and led the fight with $15 an hour, which has resulted in at least 7 states passing $15 an hour legislation, many communities doing the same, and the U.S. House of Representatives. That's what happens when workers at the grassroots level organize.
Thanks.
Yep.
And we're not stopping, Senator, until they win a union. McDonald's needs to sit down at a national bargaining table and make those jobs good jobs that people can stay safe and healthy. And we need to stop sacrificing Black and brown lives. It's completely unacceptable.
All right, there's a question, I think, for me, or maybe Jessica as well, but I think I'll take a first crack at it. It's from Chuck Pearson, and Chuck asks, how is the new stimulus coming along? I think Chuck is talking about what we call Corona 4. And this is an important issue, and we need everybody in this country to be involved in it. You got a leader in the U.S. Senate, Mitch McConnell, who says, you know what, I don't really see the urgency out there. I don't know that we have to hurry along and move aggressively on this issue. Now, as you know, the House of Representatives last Friday, passed a $3 trillion bill, a significant step forward. I have differences with some of the provisions in there, but it was a major step forward, recognizing the reality that 38 million people have filed for unemployment and are struggling in this country, that people have no health care, that people are getting evicted from their homes. So the first thing that we have got to do, Chuck, is make Trump and Mitch McConnell understand that there has never been more urgency for strong and aggressive action on the part of the Senate than right now. You got to do it. Now, there's a lot of stuff that has to be done. Let me just tell you some of what I am working on along with other senators. Number one, I think the fastest, most efficient way to put money into workers' pockets is through what we call the Paycheck Security Act. This is being done throughout Europe. And what it says to a worker, you lost your job, well, whether you're staying home or whatever, working part-time, full-time, you're not working at all, you will continue to get your paycheck and the benefits that you had. That is the fastest way, I think, to put money and security into working people in this country. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, it is insane to me that in the midst of this crisis, you probably have 100 million people or more who are uninsured or underinsured, who cannot go to the doctor if they think they have the coronavirus, cannot go to the doctor if they are sick in any other way or their kids are sick. During this emergency, while we continue the fight for Medicare for all, we should make sure that everybody in this country has access to health care without out-of-pocket expense. Number three, the idea of another $1,200 one-shot stimulus payment is just not good enough. $1,200 is what the average rent in America is. That's all it is. And to just provide one more $1,200 payment is not enough. I think we should do what Canada is doing, $2,000 per person a month. It would take just an enormous amount of anxiety off the backs of working families in this country. Will that be expensive? Yeah, it will. But in this moment, we've got to protect our future. We've got to protect our kids. And I'd rather spend the money now than spend it later when we fall into a severe depression. So those are some of the areas that I am working on. Other people are working on other very, very important issues as well. But the fight right now, and I need everybody to help us on this, is to tell McConnell and the Republican leadership in the Congress and Trump that we have to move aggressively now. We got to address the enormous, unprecedented pain and suffering which now exist. Okay, here's a question, a little bit off topic, but important. Maybe we'll direct it to Jessica. This comes from Molly Miner. Question, how can we address the rising crisis of inequality in the housing market, even among this pandemic? Tighter banking regulations, etc. All right, we got a housing crisis. I know it's true in your district. It's in my district, but it is a crisis virtually all over this country. Jessica, what are we going to do about the housing crisis?
Senator, the housing crisis is the reason why my district was one of the hardest hit. Unfortunately, because the cost of living is so high in New York and real estate interests are such a powerful force in New York politics, it is so hard for our newcomers to find a place to live. And unfortunately, sometimes they live 10, 12 people to an apartment. I've heard situations where beds are rented per shifts. And these are very dangerous living conditions. We need to invest in our public housing authorities, NYCHA, our New York Housing Authority here. We need to be able to build more affordable housing in a smart way through community land trusts. That's our goal and what we're fighting for here in New York. We need to legalize other means of living. We need to be creative. We're running out of space in New York, New York City anyway. So it's why we need to start thinking vertically and much more strategic so that we can accommodate the amount of people here and so that they can appropriately social distance within their homes if and when applicable.
And we didn't even mention 500,000 people who are homeless in this country.
I did, that's without mentioning homelessness. I have 9 shelters in my district. I'm likely getting a few more. The crisis is now economic. It was the medical crisis, and of course, it still is. I don't want to diminish that. But the fact of the matter is, in New York, and I'm sure this is true of across the country as well, people don't really make enough money to save meaningfully because we're drowning in student loan debt, because of everything else. Unfortunately, people are running out of savings, don't know how they're going to pay for rent on June 1st. It's why we're asking Governor Cuomo, please cancel rent. Don't freeze it, cancel it. Let us catch up. And so that when everybody's ready to return, outside, that once we get the green light, I was almost going to say, go back to normal. I don't want to go back to normal. I want to create a new normal that is inclusive, that thinks about workers, that puts people first. So before we do all that, I want to make sure that we're taking care of thinking about what our housing situation is and how can we prepare for the future in a way that is equitable for everyone.
Let me go to what I think should be the last question of the night. This is a question that comes from Mindy Smith, probably addressed to me, but I'm going to throw it to Mary Kay because she and I probably think similarly, and then I'll pick it up. And here's the question. What are you doing to help people who are still employed but making too little to survive? All right, so Mindy's point is, yes, a lot of people have lost their jobs completely, but don't forget about people who are out there working today, but just are not earning enough to survive. What's the agenda out there for those folks, Mary Kay?
Well, where they have union contracts, we've returned to the bargaining table to get them hazard pay and additional healthcare, childcare, and housing assistance during this time. We are helping to organize fast food, airport, nursing home, healthcare workers all across the country to
all right, so let me just interrupt you. I know that's what you're doing, but the underlining principle is if low-wage workers are going to ever earn decent wages, we're going to have to grow the trade union movement very significantly by making it easier for workers to join unions, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why we said we need to create unions for all, that create the ability for every working person, no matter what job they do, to be able to rewrite the rules that we're going to need to do with government and employers and get everybody at a table to raise wages, not just one employer at a time, but through whole sectors of our economy. Because low-wage work shouldn't exist in an economy that, as you were saying, Senator, was supposedly doing so well, but half of the country was living and working in poverty. And that has to end. And we do have to create the conditions where we can transform America. I agree with Jessica. We're not going back. Normal didn't work for us. We got to create a country where everybody can work hard for a living, lead a decent life, and those that can't work, we provide for through our social programs.
Right. I would add to that, and I agree with everything you said, the need to do what every other major country on earth does, guarantee health care
yes.
for all people is a human right, in my view, through a Medicare for all single-payer program. I think we have got to create tens of millions of jobs addressing climate change and our crumbling infrastructure. We need to rethink education in this country. I don't know if you have organized any childcare workers. Have you done that
yes.
yet?
Yes, we have 40,000 in California that are trying to go to the bargaining table to raise their poverty wages into living wages.
Don't get me going on this one, but every psychologist will tell you that 0 through 4 are the most important years of human development, and we treat childcare workers probably worse than we treat McDonald's workers. Low wages, low benefits, awful. All right, so we need to rethink education in America, need to rethink criminal justice in America. As Jessica was saying, we need big time to rethink immigration in this country. And I would hope very much that if there is any silver lining in this terrible, painful moment, when so many people have died and gotten sick and lost their jobs and are living under such mental health anxiety, that if there's any silver lining, It's what I think everybody has said. We can't go back to the old way. We got to rethink America and create a government, an economy, a healthcare system, an energy system that works for all of us, not just the few on top. So maybe out of this horrible moment, that's the lesson that we can learn and the agenda we can pursue. All right, with that, I just want to thank all of our panelists for the work they are doing every single day. These guys are working really hard, are protecting people, and I thank them very much. I thank them for taking the time to be with us tonight. And I thank everybody who has watched this program. Stay well. See you soon. Take care.